My guest this week is the Labour MP for Liverpool, Garston and Halewood, Maria Eagle. Hi, Maria.
Hiya.
Nice to speak to you this afternoon. I don't know if you've had the chance to catch up with this breaking news, but I have to ask you about it first. Gary Lineker, we've been told, is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement is reached on his social media use. That's what the BBC has said in a statement. Of course, it follows a big row over his impartiality or otherwise, over comments he made criticising the government's new asylum policy. What do you think of this? I mean, should big stars like Gary Lineker be allowed to have an opinion on social media, or should they, keep politics out of their punditry, if you like?
Well, I mean, I don't think him saying things on his social media has anything to do with his punditry, really. And no doubt he does he will think he does what his contract allows him to do. I understand some of the concerns that people have, but I think it's always people like him that get pulled up on it. I mean, we've got a chairman of the BBC who makes donations to the Tory party. Well, so what are the BBC going to do about impartiality there? I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, this only applies to employees or people who are contracted to the BBC, and it doesn't apply to some of the senior leadership, because what they've got to be careful about is looking like they're giving in to government pressure. That's never something that the BBC should do.
I think that the issue over impartiality is to do with, whether, as you say, it is to do with the terms of somebody's contract or not. And somebody like Gary Lineker, whilst he does present a sports programme, he does have a huge following on social media. He's the BBC's highest paid star. And there may be people who follow him on social media who don't watch Match of the Day, but they are clear of his opinion. And I think that the people feel that he shouldn't be critical of the government.
Well, I think that these are matters that will no doubt be sorted out, but really should have been sorted out in whatever contract he signed, to be honest. It isn't as if impartiality at the BBC is something that's a new concept, is it? So I would have thought that would have been dealt with in his contract, but I obviously haven't seen his contract, so I don't know what that said. So, I mean, I'm sure that it'll be sorted out one way and the other, but I would be equally concerned to make sure that the BBC isn't seen to give in to political pressure from the government of the day.
Now, of course, the reason why Gary Lineker is in trouble is because he's commented on the government's migration bill. And, of course, that's been huge news this week, a fresh bid to stop people crossing the channel in small boats. Do you agree that what's going on at the moment needs to change, needs to stop, the system needs overhauling? What do you think?
Well, I think that what we've seen, as we often see with this government, when they're presented with a serious problem that's arisen as a consequence of their uselessness over the last 13 years, we get slogans and just rehashed arrangements that haven't worked in the past to try and give them a political advantage rather than solving the actual problem. I mean, there are now serious problems of small boat crossing. You just have to look at the numbers of people coming over. But that's partly because we never used to have this problem when we had a Labour government, because we were much better at dealing with the asylum applications. We had better arrangements with our neighbours in France and in the EU. And what we're seeing now is partly a consequence of the government's uselessness over the last 13 years. A lot of the criminal gangs that are operating these arrangements are doing it from Britain. Why aren't the government focusing on cracking down on the criminal gangs, stopping the boats coming over that way? And instead we just see three-word slogans. And some of the proposals that they've announced it isn't necessarily going to work. This bill that they're introducing into the Commons that we learned about this week isn't necessarily going to work. They've not told us when these small boat crossings are going to end. They're higher than ever. The claims when people make it over here are unprocessed for years, and that leaves the taxpayer paying for hotel rooms for people, criminal gangs exploiting people to get them over here, and when they get over here, And the asylum system has been run by this government for the last 13 years, and it's in a right. Why don't they focus on sorting out?
So what's the answer then? What would Labour do differently?
Well, you've got to start by cracking down on the criminal gangs to stop them making money out of bringing people over. You've got to start by making sure that the claims, when they are made, are processed much more quickly, so that if economic migrants are coming over who don't have an asylum claim, they can be sent back to where they've come from much more quickly. If you were to deal with the actual administration of the system and improve the system, a lot of this problem would go away, because people wouldn't be able to get away with coming over here so quickly. Instead, we're spending enormous amounts of money, millions of pounds, putting people up in hotel rooms whilst their claims aren't even processed or considered. And the people making money out of it are the criminal gangs who appear to be getting away with it. And so this is just going to get worse until you start dealing with the proper administration of the asylum system. That's what we need to do.
Now, it's the budget next Wednesday, so just to look ahead to next week, what would Labour like to hear from the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt?
Well, we've said that there are a few things that ought to be a priority. The first one is to help with the cost of living crisis. Let's make sure that we stop the energy price cap going up in April, because people are really, really worried about, even though the cost on the markets of oil and gas is coming down, people are expecting their costs to go up in April for their energy bills. So we've got to stop the energy price cap going up, freeze fuel duty at its current rate if they've got any headroom in the budget. We've got to tackle the cost of living crisis by stopping these costs going up. That's got to be a priority. A proper one-off windfall tax on oil and gas to make sure that the profits that are being made out of charging these high prices, even though actually internationally the gas and oil prices are coming down now. We're not seeing it over here. And the companies that are making money out of it are the oil and gas extractors. And so we need to make sure that there's a proper windfall tax on them to fund some of these other alleviation arrangements. I mean, we've also said, for example, that priority should be to scrap non-dom tax status to fund breakfast clubs in all our primary schools in England, and actually start taking steps to have a serious long-term economic plan that puts working people first, instead of spending your time in office dividing people up to try and stay in office. I mean, after 13 years of the Tories, we've got everything is worse. I mean, does anybody feel better off after 13 years of the Tory government? Is anything working better than it did 13 years ago? No. We need a budget and a government that starts tackling some of these problems that have been caused by our current government, and focusing on making people's lives better and helping people have a better life. That's what the government should be focused on.
We'll have to see what Jeremy Hunt pulls out of the bag on Wednesday. Maria, it was International Women's Day this week. It always generates headlines and social media campaigns from big companies and so on and so forth. But the ideas behind it need to last beyond the day, don't they? Yeah, they do. I mean, I think we still don't have the pay gap closed. If you look at what's happened in relative poverty over the last 10 years, 60% of the rise in relative poverty that's hit people has hit women. And women have been much harder hit by what's gone wrong in the last 10 years than anybody else. Women are the majority of single parents, they're the majority of disabled people, low-paid people, part-time and insecure workers, and they're the ones who've been clobbered the most. So we've got to realise that we need to do more for women if we're going to make sure that they can take part properly in our society, and that our society can benefit from the skills and strengths of the women who are in it. And that's what equality is all about. That's what International Women's Day is all about, just highlighting the fact that we can't make progress as a society if we ignore more than half of the people who live in it. So we've got some policies that we'd like to focus on. And I think there is some cross-party support for trying to close the gender pay gap and make sure that women can participate more. But
I don't think the current government has got much of a record on it, unfortunately.
OK, Maria, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us this afternoon. That's Maria Eagle, who is the Labour MP for Garston and Halewood.